Hello, welcome to the AERA Hip Hop Theories, Praxis, and Pedagogy's Special Interest Group webinar entitled Critical Mentoring in Hip Hop Based Education. This webinar was a part of a launch of our mentorship program for the Hip Hop SIG, which pairs senior scholars in hip hop based education, research, practice, and scholarship with emerging practitioners and researchers and scholars in hip hop based education. It is a 2-year program. And so if you're interested in being a part either as a mentor or a mentee, please look out for the applications that will come out in 2022. So this panel features a discussion with Drs. Emery Petchauer, Stevie Johnson, and Torie Weiston-Serdan, and it begins with Torie giving her keynote talk. And you'll see the video doesn't include her bio, so I will share that with you now, and then it will begin. Torie is a scholar and practitioner with over 15 years of teaching and youth programming experience. She's an emerging leader in the youth mentoring field. She wrote Critical Mentoring, a practical guide, which has become the handbook for culturally sustaining youth work in the discipline. Outside of teaching and research, Weiston-Serdan runs the Youth Mentoring Action Network, a nonprofit dedicated to leveraging justice and equity mentoring. Through her community-based work, she mentors Inland Empire youth through high school into college and careers. She also works extensively with other community-based organizations in support of their youth advocacy efforts, specializing in training mentors to work with diverse youth populations, for example, Black, Latinx, LGBTQ+, first-generation college students, and low-income youth. As a scholar, she examines how marginalized and minoritized youth are served by mentoring and youth development programs. Weiston-Serdan is one of the founding board members for Mentor CA and currently serves on the boards of Give, Build, Share, Big Brothers Big Sisters, LGBTQ National Advisory Council, and the research board of the National Mentoring Resource Center. If you do have any questions about the mentoring program for the SIG or the SIG itself, you can email us at aerahiphopsig@gmail.com.
Came from is like, how do we get these concepts around race, class, gender, sexuality, right, ability? How do we start looking at this in relationship to mentoring and in relationship to youth work? And it was also about like, how do I show up as a mentor for Black and brown folks, right? Because in all of the mentoring research, I was looking at these big sort of nonprofit industrial complex organizations engaging in mentoring work that didn't look like it really reflected, you know, what mentoring looked like in my community. This official one-to-one matching process, which the research says is great, and I'm not going to necessarily knock it. But folks were like, yeah, you come into this office, you sign up to be a mentor, we do an intake on you, we're gonna match you with this young person that you have no idea who they are, we're gonna set y'all up, and y'all gonna be in a relationship, in a mentoring relationship. And it was like, nah, fam, like that doesn't even make sense. So I had to start sort of really unpacking that, like, what does that look like in Black and brown communities? What does that look like in queer communities, right? How do elders show up in those communities? And then why aren't we calling all of those things mentoring, right? Why aren't we calling other mothers mentoring? Why aren't we calling aunties and play cousins? Like, why aren't they mentors? Why are they, why aren't we sort of including them in this research? And so again, critical mentoring for me was really about this vision of building community and long-term relationship and support around these young people, right? Thinking about, we say at the Youth Mentoring Action Network, reimagining and remaking youth-led multi-generational spaces, right? So not sort of putting all of these traditional one-to-one hierarchical sort of boxes around what mentoring looks like, but thinking about an entire community of elders in a reciprocal relationship with young people where we're learning from them, where they're learning from us, and where we're building a healthier community for all of us together, right? And the young folks just say woke mentoring. Like, they don't even use all these terms. They're like, this is just woke mentoring, right? And the other stuff is trash, as they would describe it. But for me, this has become, a passion of mine, because young people have been engaged in this constant process of teaching me what it means to show up as an elder. And the respect that I need to have in entering their spaces, and the respect that I need to have in listening to them, and supporting their processes rather than displacing their processes with mine, right? And thinking about hip hop terminology. I always say to folks, like, the OGs wrote the original, but the young people write the remix, right? And so, and we should sort of constantly be in that evolving process. And so again, we're in this powerful moment, and sis, you don't have to, like, if I'm going over time, you don't have to like cue me or something, but we are in this sort of powerful moment where young people are leading in very real, honest, unapologetic ways, right? Where they have literally hit the streets on our behalf and have said, like, we can carry this movement and we have something to say. And adults, y'all been tripping. Like, y'all been sitting back, you haven't been doing enough, right? And that's not, I don't want that to sound like an unloving critique of adults, but just thinking about the fact that we've been working on these issues and we have gotten to a certain place, right? But we haven't gotten far enough. And so young people have really taken up that mantle. And so for us to kind of then position ourselves as leading them, when they are sort of taking up a project that we failed, and we see ourselves as like leading them or telling them what to do, right? We're beyond that, right? And then the flip side is that adults hear me talk like this and they say, well, what are you saying? Like, adults have a part, you just want us to, let young people go. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that we need to renegotiate the relationship here, right? That this is not an authoritative top-down relationship. Young people are bringing it. They are intelligent, they are loving, they are passionate, they are organized, they have skills, right? They have experiences, all of these things are valid. And so we need to renegotiate how we show up to support them and not be thinking about how do we run things, right? How are we telling them what to do? How are we dictating things? And so again, critical mentoring is really kind of turning that mentoring concept upside down and thinking about that again. And I keep saying, like, how do we show up as elders in the community? What wisdom do we bring? How do we impart that wisdom without co-opting or taking over what young people are doing? And allowing them, clearing up the space, right? And allowing them space to really freedom dream. Because I have to remind adults all the time, like, we've gotten to this point where, like, we're just trying to pay bills. As radical as we all say we are, capitalism is running us at the end of the day. And so we're going to be as vocal as we can before we lose that paycheck. That's about where we stop, right? And so at some point we need to say, and historically, we need to look at this. Like, historically, young people have always taken up the mantle. During the civil rights movement, even when older folks were like, I don't want my boss to see me, I'm gonna lose my job, I'm gonna lose my ability to care for my family, young people were the ones filling the streets, marching, going to jail. Like, look at the historic Children's March. There have been examples historically where young people have been able to lead us in this way. And so again, it's renegotiating where we are, right? And not saying we have so much that you guys need to move out of the way and we're gonna do it, or let us tell you how to do it, right? It needs to be, here are our experiences. This is what we've learned. Here's how we've navigated this system. I'm gonna share this with you. I'm gonna support you, right, in this way. But you take it to where you think you need it to go, right? And I got your back. Right? Not just stepping to the side, but being like, I got your back. Oh, I didn't think about shutting freeways down. That's what we do? We shut freeways down? I got you, young one. I'm there, right? So just really thinking about, just really kind of, again, shifting that paradigm around how we show up in community around our young people, and thinking about this as a multi-generational project, that all of us should be supporting one another, but particularly elders should be thinking about how do we center the voices and experiences of young folks, and how do we hold them up. And I was just saying this quote by Angela Davis where she says, young people can see further because they are standing on our shoulders, right? So thinking about that concept that, like, we've done our building and now it's time to let young people take up the mantle, and it's time to support them, fully support them in that endeavor. Is that my time, sis? I feel like I'm getting there. Look, she like, that's been your time.
There. Thank you so much for that. I want to hear more, and perhaps there'll be time for it in our closing, but I do want to make sure there's opportunity for folks to ask questions and engage in this dialogue. Thank you so much. You all can join me in a virtual round of applause for this incredible grounding and centering talk. Thank you, Torie. I do want to introduce to everyone my co-host, co-moderator, and partner in this work, Daren Graves, who's with us. Another round of applause. Thank you for doing this work with me, Daren, for being here today. I know this is a crazy time for everyone at the start of the semester and the end of all types of things. So thank you for this time. So what we'd like to do is open up this session into a panel discussion. And to introduce our second panelist, I'm going to, as is fitting, I think, for a mentoring webinar, have a mentee of Dr. Emery Petchauer introduce him. And so let me introduce to you, soon to be in the works, Dr. Kaisha Jennings. And give me one moment. Kaisha Jennings is an English lecturer and faculty mentor at NC State University, where she teaches first-year writing. Kaisha is a sought-after speaker and has been an invited guest at Virginia Tech University, UNC Chapel Hill University, Everett University, and A3C Hip Hop Festival. She has presented at over 15 academic conferences on composition, literature, and hip hop. Her research focuses on Black literature and culture in general, but more specifically, her research centers Black women writers, hip hop studies, hip hop feminism, and digital media. In 2018, she contributed to the St. James Encyclopedia of Hip Hop Culture. Most recently, her research on Black women in hip hop and digital spaces was awarded the Heldrick Dvorak Travel Fellowship for the 2020 Southwest Popular American Culture Association Conference and the William E. Brigman Award for Outstanding Graduate Student Paper for the 2020 Popular Culture Association Conference. And even more recently, she dropped this incredible piece called City Girls, Hot Girls, and the Reimagining of Black Women in Hip Hop and Digital Spaces, which I will drop into the chat for those of you who are interested. I thought it was really important, for being authentic and transparent about what mentorship looks like specifically within hip hop-based education research and practice and theory, that a mentee of Dr. Petchauer should be able to share, some of her experiences with that type of mentorship and what that's looked like for her scholarship. And so please join me in welcoming Kaisha Jennings.
Dr. Emery Petchauer is an associate professor at Michigan State University. His research has focused on the aesthetic practices of urban arts, particularly hip hop culture, and their connections to teaching, learning, and living. He is the author of Hip Hop Culture in College Students' Lives, the first scholarly study of hip hop culture on college campuses, and also the co-editor of School and Hip Hop, Expanding Hip Hop-Based Education Across the Curriculum. Nearly 2 decades of organizing and sustaining urban art spaces across the United States informed this scholarly work. In addition to these scholarly pursuits, he has nearly 20 years of experience organizing and DJing at community hip hop events. The author of more than 40 academic articles, Dr. Petchauer also studies high-stakes teacher licensure exams and their relationship to the racial diversity of the teaching profession. Dr. Petchauer has received teaching awards at both the high school and college levels, including the Board of Trustees Distinguished Teaching Award at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, the nation's first HBCU. Throughout his career, Petchauer has shown a commitment to social justice by providing equity and justice-oriented organizational and leadership development. It was at Lincoln University where I met Petch. He was my education professor, and during my junior year, Petch shared with me that he had a PhD in hip hop. This conversation changed the trajectory of my academic career. When I realized that teaching high school was no longer aligned with my goal or my professional nor personal identity, my experience in Petchauer's class made me consider the possibility of becoming a college professor. As a young Black girl from Southside Jamaica, Queens, becoming a college professor did not seem within my reach. Once realizing the need to shift gears in my career goals, I thought of Petch. I admired the freedom he had in the classroom, his flexibility, his creative approach to our class discussions, and of course, his engagement with hip hop through a scholarly lens. Ever since I shared my dream and desire of teaching college with Petch, for the past 11 years, he has guided me. Our mentor-mentee relationship happened in the most organic way possible. Sometimes I feel like I kidnapped him and just kept texting him. I'm not even sure where we began to use the language mentor-mentee. I always joke that he's my manager and I'm like a fox rapper. There isn't a major decision that I have made without running it by Petch. He has kept me grounded by reminding me what matters most, which is good, impactful scholarship. And he has provided me with such a unique, here's how you survive academia 101 mentor experience that I am just so grateful to have had. And I'm just like super emotional because I mean, my career wouldn't be what it is without Petch. Introducing Dr. Petchauer.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm gonna cry. I just know that academia is just harmful to Black folks and folks of color. And I've literally been like so protected, like because of Petch. Whether he says like, you know, hey, at this point in your career, you need to do this, you need to do that, or here's this person, let me link you with that person. And I mean, when I hear about other people's stories, it just makes me know that I've been blessed to be protected in academia.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kaisha. I'm gonna sign off now and go journal. Thank you.
And to introduce our our third panelist, Daren Graves is going to intro you to the newly minted Dr. Johnson.
Good afternoon, y'all. I don't think I'm gonna be able to make it as emotional as that. I'm still working through that. That was very beautiful. But I'm honored to be able to introduce Dr. Stevie Johnson. And if y'all don't know about Dr. View, you will soon. And you know, I love the way that, you know, I might be more of a quote unquote senior scholar than Dr. Johnson, but the way that he is moving through this space, right, moving through the world, is something that I really look up to, and I've been watching very closely, and I'm very honored to be able to introduce Stevie Dr. View Johnson, who is a DJ, producer, educator, and community organizer from Longview, Texas. With close to 10 years of college student development experience, Dr. View received his PhD in higher education administration from the University of Oklahoma in May of 2019. In his written hip hop and album dissertation, that's right, you heard that, hip hop and is written and album dissertation entitled Curriculum of the Mind, a Black crit narrative, hip hop inquiry hip hop album on anti-Blackness and freedom for the Black male collegians at historically white institutions, received the 2019 Bobby Wright Dissertation of the Year Award for the Association for ASH at ASH, right? Dr. View is the CEO of the Space Program, an independent record label and hip hop collective, CEO of Invisible Records, executive producer of Fire in Little Africa, which is a multimedia hip hop project commemorating Tulsa's historic Greenwood district known as Black Wall Street, and the manager in education and diversity outreach for the Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan Center. Dr. View is married to his wife Ariel and is father to 3-year-old son Amir Sky. And if y'all don't know, you should know about his debut album, Invisible Man, which is just amazing, and it's available right now on any digital platform you like. So that is Dr. View.
Appreciate y'all having me, man. Can y'all hear me good?
Yes, we can. Great artwork too.
Yeah, I'm glad to be in the space. Glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So before we jump into the discussion, just to foreground some of my own subjectivities, and again, how Daren and I came to this panel and the questions that we have today. So I happen to have been taught and mentored by some of the founding scholars of hip-hop-based education, including Dr. Ernest Morel, Dr. Christopher Emden, and Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, which is incredible and great. And I'm so incredibly blessed to have been taught by these people. It also means when you are a doctoral student and you're asked to give an overview of everything that's ever been done in the field that you're studying and the gaps, right? It causes its own sort of, challenges and opportunities, right? To be in the same sort of physical space with these folks and have them reading your work. You kind of have to really live up to the expectations and make sure you're honoring their work. And so a lot of these questions kind of come from that place of having received hip-hop based mentorship, right? Knowing that that is a very special thing that not everyone has and gets. And also thinking about what are some of the challenges that come from that and what are some of the opportunities and possibilities. So with that being said, our first question for you all is, at what point, and this is specific or specifically sort of designed for Emery and Torie, but of course, Stevie, you can jump in with any sort of experiences you also that come to mind for you when you hear it. At what point did you realize you had transitioned from being a mentee into a mentor, right? What was that moment where you're like, oh, I'm that person now, right? Because everyone here, I imagine, has had a mentor at some point, but at a certain point, you're them. So what was that like? How did you go about embracing that role? And what were some of the new skills that you found that new sort of position required? Anyone can start.
All right. So, I mean, first of all, I don't think I've transitioned. I think, on some level, I'm still very much a protege. I think about people like Dr. Love, who has really taken a lot of time to support me and mentor me, right? I consider myself one of her proteges. Dr. Dillard, same thing. I consider myself one of her proteges. I think, for me, if there has been a transition, it's been about sort of age and wisdom on some level. And I'm not there yet. Like, I'm only 38, so I'm not there yet. But I think in terms of what I'm giving my young people, like I'm seeing myself more as a bridge, right? I'm taking from my elders and I'm the elder to some young folks and I'm giving to them, right? So I don't really see it fully as like, I've arrived, you know what I mean? I see it as this ongoing process of sort of taking from my elders, sitting at their feet, learning from them, and then trying my best to pass some of those lessons learned onto the young people that I'm working with, right? And that for me, that's a cyclical process, but also just like, also this, it's cyclical, but also linear in some way in terms of like reaching back to the ancestors, right? And just sort of passing down and passing down and passing down from generation to generation.
Yeah. I think there's an analogy that I used to think about mentoring a lot, and it's kind of like you're walking around and somebody sticks a sign on your back that says mentor, and then people see it and they start following you, and you don't know that there's a sign on your back. And I get it's better that that sign says mentor than kick me or something like that. But I think that that realization comes when people start asking you certain things or coming to you, even cold calling you in some ways. And I think that there's a certain like recognition that you have to make of like, oh, like this is people are seeing me in a particular way in this particular context that I'm not used to. And then there's a certain like identity shift that comes from that. And I really mean that in that particular context, because I think I feel like I've been a mentor for a long time, but in different contexts. When I was, younger, I was, a coach, and that's a type of mentoring. It's very contextual that people start thinking about you as a mentor in a context where you're not used to thinking about yourself in that way. So I think it's really crucial to like understand when that happened. Even like, like Stevie, like I'm thinking about when you and I first connected, like cold email, cold call. Like I remember sitting in the parking lot of a school like that I was about to go into and having like a 30-minute convo with Stevie. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of insights in there. That doesn't mean everybody can cold call me. All right. Don't take that the wrong way out there. But I think that to the second part of that question with what are the particular skills to develop when you realize, all right, people are looking at me in this context in a different type of way. I think in some ways, like that that intro that Kaisha gave, which even just me saying that, I'm kind of going back to that, and it's yeah, it's there's a lot in there. But I think that that type of really long-term mentoring relationship is actually, it's beautiful, but it's really atypical. It's really uncommon. And I don't think that that one-to-one type thing, and I hope we all experience that and better, but I think that that one-to-one type thing over a long period of time where the relationship is able to evolve and change as people go through different seasons, I don't think that's super common. So I think that really a key skill that a mentor has to develop when they recognize themselves in that context is being able to broker relationships with other people, so that the person who is receiving mentorship doesn't just have this one person who's giving them everything, but they actually have this network or constellation of mentors for really specific things, because one person isn't going to be able to give you everything you need and support you in various ways. And that's because of, load, time demand, but particularly expertise. So I think that if one finds themselves as kind of like that central mentoring figure, there's a key pivot there about me doing what I can to have this person's back. And I'm with that language that Torie put out there, having somebody's back, but also knowing when I can't have this person's back because the way that they need their back to be had isn't a skill that I have, but I can broker relationships with other people so that they have this kind of network of mentoring to give them a range of supports and resources that they need.
I'll add a little bit. J. Cole said it best. I'm little bro and big bro all at once. And that's essentially where I see myself at. I'll give a short story. 2013, I just finished my master's program, and I applied for a job as a coordinator in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Central Oklahoma. And a lot of people knew me as a DJ. So I remember there was actually a student panel, and one of the questions that they asked was, "Hey, are you going to DJ our parties?" And at that moment, I was like, I think I need to separate my hip hop sensibilities because I don't know if people are going to take me serious. So what I started to notice is the more that I took away from myself and from my identity, the more, the less engaged the students were in my classroom. So there was times where, my biggest thing when it comes to mentor is listening. And literally, like, we have a relationship where they're like, "Hey, like, this shit is whack," or like, "Hey, like how you're engaging us is boring." And for me to be able to know that came from a place of love, and for them to be like, "Yo, you're a DJ, you're a producer, you have very, intricate ways of connecting the material in ways that my other teachers can't. We need that from you." And that was just a turning point for me to know, like, hey, like, I can be myself. I can, wear a hoodie and talk the vernacular of the institution and whatever I need to do. So I think that's just, it's a gift and a curse of being a mentor and a mentee. It's a lot of responsibility, but it's an honor responsibility, especially when you're able to listen to the needs of the students. And even as Emery said, even if you can't be any and everything for them, having boundaries and expectations to where, like, hey, these are things that I can offer to you, or what do you need from me, and I'm able to tell you exactly what I can offer to you, is really how I kind of position myself when it comes to mentoring. So.
Thanks. Appreciate that, y'all. So I'm gonna ask the next question, and y'all started to get into this, but I'm just gonna ask it more explicitly to talk about some of the what are some of the challenges that you guys associate with mentoring relationships. So anybody who wants to take that is great, and I'm sure everybody's got something to add to this.
I mean, I think the challenges for me as a person, is just getting outside of myself. I think a lot of times, especially when I was in my doc program, I was like, man, am I crazy? Has anybody experienced these same things that I'm experiencing? Primarily when I was thinking about, doing a dissertation as a rap album, it was like, am I crazy? Like, what's going on? And so I think just getting outside of yourself and knowing that even if people haven't experienced exactly what you're going through, they know the tools or they know the people to help you navigate through that space. And I'll talk about ARA, that's a whole nother conversation I'm going to get to later. But I think just navigating and communicating expectations is very important. I've seen a lot of situations, including my own personal experience of when expectations are not, put out from the jump. I mean, it just can get real ugly, really ugly, really quick. And so obviously everybody's lives are busy. I mean, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a DJ. There's a lot of things I could be doing, but knowing that I have people who see me, and knowing that I didn't get to this place by myself, primarily on the backs of Black women, I have a responsibility to make sure that I reach back. And so I think the challenges is navigating or communicating what those expectations look like, and just getting outside of your head. I mean, there's times where hey, I don't know if I can reach out to Emery or Torie. They too Hollywood. Those are things that come in your head. But it's when you really sit down and talk to these people, they're like, oh, that's the homie. That's family. I can pick up the phone, I can send an email, and we could talk about it. Or 6 months can go by, we haven't talked, and I could pick up the phone, and it's we just never stopped talking at all. So I think once you get outside of yourself and humanize these people that we read, and know that they just come from similar struggles as yourself, I think from there it takes away being a challenge in a sense.
Yeah. I'd kind of amplify a couple points Stevie made, specifically around this notion of clarifying expectations. My experience is that a lot of mentoring relationships, people kind of fall into the relationships, right? You're in the same place, same time, and we hit it off, or we knew the same people. These this kind of relationship analogies here. So I think that sometimes that works. I would say that it was situations and contexts that brought Kaisha and I into professional long-term relationship, Stevie as well. There was a specific ask out or reach out conversation, but I would say for the certain period of time during your disc, Stevie, where we would talk in certain frequency and get into the nitty-gritty research question, right? Methodology, really granular level stuff. Even thinking about that, there wasn't a formal, Stevie never said Emery, will you be my mentor for the next 6 months as I work through this specific problem, right? Now, I think it worked out okay, but I think that having the proactivity to ask somebody will you mentor me in this specific thing for this period of time so that I can gain X, Y, and Z. I think that's the kind of specificity that will take care of a lot of possible ambiguities that might not be worked out in themselves. And even just reflecting upon I'd say Stevie and I's mentorish interactions, I was listening and responding in certain ways that I thought would be necessary, and that wasn't even without this real clear ask from him. And I think it worked out okay, but I'm just thinking about how a very specific ask from the position of the mentee can even better get them what they want, and let the mentor know if I have the time to actually give this, if I have the skills, or if I need to start brokering to get this person what they need. So I think that clarity of ask can just be super important on both ends.
So just briefly, I would add, Emery, I agree with that 100%. I think a lot of that comes with us never being prepared as proteges. We always try to prepare mentors. We never try to prepare folks to be proteges and say, if you want to engage in a mentoring relationship and you want to get something out of it, you also have to show up a certain way, right? We're always telling mentors, here's what you should do. But we are very rarely telling other folks hey, in order to be mentored and to have an effective mentoring relationship, these are the ways you need to show up, right? And some of that is knowing what you need and knowing how to ask for that, and then picking the right folks, right, who can provide that for you.
Oh, these are some gems. I don't know if you see me furiously taking notes here. Thank you. And by the way, please, if you have questions that you want to fold into this discussion, just drop those into the Q&A, and we'll get to those shortly. In the interest of getting to those questions, I'm going to fold the next two questions into each other somehow. So as I mentioned earlier, and as I think has come through in a lot of these stories, there are very particular realities that come with mentoring relationships and scholarship and teaching and all these other things, specifically within sort of a hip hop based culture, community, ethos, etc. And so I mentioned one of them is just figuring out, how do I identify the gaps in my mentor's work, right? Which is a very awkward thing to try to do, right? Like, this work is amazing, but here's why it's not enough, so that I can then do mine, right? I've also heard a lot of stories about competition, right? When you're doing this kind of work in a very narrow field, whether it's hip hop ed, or I'm sure it happens in other narrow fields, that there are stories where mentors would be like, I'll take this one, right? So how have you sort of experienced and navigated some of the tensions of this work in terms of, you know, dealing with competition, maybe people like misrepresenting your work as they write about it, or trying to honor your mentor's work, etc. And then also, what are some of the possibilities, right, within that? So the tensions and the possibilities, I think they're connected. And I think about the story you told, Emery, of getting cold called by Stevie. I know I cold called Chris Emden. Well, I cold emailed. I was like, you don't know me, but I think you do what I do. And I've done that with plenty of people, and they've been so responsive, because there's something about sort of like the nature and ethos of hip hop where it's very informal, right? Where we're like, we got you, right? It feels wrong to not have each other. But then that also comes with its own challenges, right? Because there's only so much time in the day. And so how have you sort of navigated the possibilities and tensions of hip hop based education mentoring? It's a challenging one, I know.
Want me to go? So, to answer your question, I try to stay in my lane. I stay in my lane, and I knew from jump what type of scholar that I wanted to be. So when I applied for my PhD program, I said, I don't want to do tenure track. I don't want to be an administrator. Like, I want to roll up my sleeves, like, and be a community activist, scholar. Like, I want to be in the streets. So I think when people hear that, especially like a committee or a chair, they're kind of like, okay, what do we do with this student? And so one thing that I really took out of my dissertation was this concept of the epistemology of listening. And it's this concept of, there's always going to be a sacred or political act of trust that is developed regardless of what you're doing. Like, meaning will be made, and you have to just trust the process and know that it's going to happen. And I almost lost that after my second year, when A.D. Carson, I'm sure everyone knows, A.D. Carson came out off the press 2017, and was like, yo, this is the dissertation album. I was like, I'd already been playing around with the idea. I saw it, and that's something that I really saw myself doing, and expanding upon his work to say, like, hey, those are his experiences, but I can develop a collective or develop some students to talk about their experiences through a hip hop album. And that was very frowned upon at my institution, to the point where my chair resigned. And for 6 months, I didn't have a committee. And so a friend of mine was like, hey, like, you should go to AERA. At that time, it was in San Antonio. And I was like, what the hell is AERA? And so they told me about it, but they were like, hey, they got this hip hop SIG. I was like, okay, I'm listening. And then they started dropping names. They was like Petchauer and Stovall and Love and Emden and Washington and, you know, Edmund Ajapong and Ian. I'm like, okay. So I developed a pilot study for my dissertation. I put it on a CD and a flash drive. I drove from Norman, Oklahoma to San Antonio. And I told myself, I had a conversation. I talked to myself a lot. I said, self, if these folks ain't about that life, I'm quitting my program, like, straight up. So I drove probably 7 hours and went to AERA. First session was Chris Emden. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning. Waited till, you know, people come up to him afterwards and try to talk to him. I was like, hey, let me give him his space. He didn't know me from a can of paint. And I was like, hey, man, I need your help. This is what I'm doing. He was like, just stop talking. Just like, let's make it happen. and he ended up being on my committee. And so I say that to say, like, I knew what I wanted. I just didn't have the support that I needed to get where I was trying to go. And having AERA, the Hip Hop SIG, just wrap their arms around me, those were the benefits. I found the people who understood my language, who didn't see me as intimidating, who didn't see the knowledge that I had. You know, a lot of times, at least from my experience, when professors don't know something, they see you as a threat. And I didn't see those people when I was at AERA. They were like, "Oh, you talking about this? Oh, you should check this out. We should check this out. Oh, where's the Black women at? Like, we gonna check you." So it was all this energy that I was like, I realized that people try to be gatekeepers when in reality the AERA was like, we're the gate openers. Like, this is your time to shine. So I think with that, it's just staying in my lane, keeping my head down, knowing what I want to do, not sure how to do it, but having the people around me who understood me, who was going to ground me in that language. Obviously, with that 2009 article with Emery, it helped a lot. So it's just all those different things just really just helped me get to where I'm at. And so I'm just truly grateful for AERA. But to answer your question, that's what it was.
I'm gonna have to chop that up and use it as our SIG promo video.
I just, Stevie, you said the exact words at the beginning that I was thinking was just stay in your lane, right? And that's my philosophy too. Like, look, I'm a critical youth worker. I got a couple things to say about education. That's it. That's my lane. Like, we all have what we do, and in direct response to this whole this conversation about competition. For me, I'm not competing with my folks. Like, look, we all have our work, and we all have our lane to be in, and we all have something to contribute. What I tell young people all the time is like, look, activism shows up in different forms. Find your corner of the world, do your work, period. That's it, right? And so for me, it's not competition at all. It's about respect. It's about acknowledgement. It's about collaboration, right? It's about working in community with one another. But for me, I'm staying in my lane. I do critical youth work. I have some things to say about education, having been in education for 15 years. But that is my lane. And when folks call me and they're like, we're trying to do abolitionists. Okay, you want to talk to Bettina. You're not trying to talk to me. That's not my lane, right? And I don't have any problems with doing that. And I think that, a lot of what higher ed does to us, which disrupts, the kind of mentoring that we should be building with one another, is kind of forces us into these silos where we have to be expert and we have to kind of like get our market share, and it really shouldn't be about that. It should be about us as a collective of voices saying, okay, this is my corner, this is Stevie's corner, this is Emery corner over here, but together, look at the force that we have and look at everything we're offering to the higher ed community and the community in general, right? And so again, I 100% agree, like stay in your lane, know your work, and then know when you can offer something and when you can't.
Yeah, I want to add one small thing here. Really, actually, it's two things I want to add. With this notion of staying in your lane, I would add that it's really important that what you think about your lane isn't constructed just by how academe thinks about a lane. Like, you think about the difference between like a lane and a silo. Like, we think about higher ed has silos, right? So like, what does it mean for you to construct a lane in your area of expertise, so on and so forth? Because you might even say like you want to like start with hip hop. Well, there's a long tradition of hip hop, of hip hop artists, and I mean artists actually being fluent in multiple elements and expressions of hip hop, right? So like, yeah, you can rap, but you also have a hand, right? So like, what does it mean to like have a lane as fundamentally different construction of your expertise versus a silo in academe? Like the other thing I'd add is like, this is kind of the competition thing. Like, this is like a super granular level, but this is really profound for me. So I remember I was writing the introduction to a special issue of Urban Education in 2015 on like new directions in hip hop based education. And I was writing the intro, and I kept like, I was stuck in this way of writing that I would like had adopted from just like scholarship that kept saying, such and such has failed to, it's like X has failed to Y, therefore Z. and Z was like what I wanted to do. And it was like, I was like, this just like, there's something wrong with this construction of like X has failed to Y, therefore Z, to justify Z what I was going to do. And I think I was writing that way because that's how we see lots of people justifying their work, by pointing out other failures. So I made a pivot to like, let me say like such and such has yet to expand and do this particular thing, right? So it was a linguistic shift, and there's a million different ways to make that. It's not about that particular language, but for me, it was a really big breakthrough of moving away from just justifying what I felt like I was doing based upon other people's failures, right? So it was more a pivot toward, we've yet to do this. Like, by doing this, we will further expand, we will further amplify, we will further do this other thing. So even like at the sentence level of writing, if we're just thinking about the scholarly aspect of this, the sentence level, we can take up certain ways that make ourselves combative, when there's different ways of writing that we can socialize ourselves into that make us be building instead of tearing down.
Thank y'all. I'm just gonna ask one. This is just last question. Just a chance for you. Any final, additional recommendations? Anything else about helping create maintain a successful mentoring relationship? This is last chance to. Any last tips, and then we're gonna try. I'm sure after that we're gonna move to some Q&A.
I would just go ahead, Torie.
You good, bro?
I was just gonna say, don't let your ego get in the way. I genuinely try to check my ego all the time, because especially when the lights are on you, you start to feel yourself, or an article comes out, or somebody interviews you. So it's just like, just reminding myself like why I did the work, or why I'm doing the work. Just not allow my ego to get in the way.
I was just gonna say, showing up as your authentic self, and really focusing on the relationship part of mentoring. We say mentoring in, sort of isolation of relationship, but it's a relationship. Like I tell adults all the time, if young folks don't like you, you're not mentoring, right? So, really thinking about what it means to build a relationship with someone, and with that understanding that mentoring is gonna take place, but showing up as your authentic self and really focusing on building the relationship.
I would also add, like, owning your faults. Like, it's okay to say, like, I'm sorry, I apologize, I made a mistake. Like, hey, can we sit down and talk through this? How did I make you feel when I did this, or when I said this? I think that's the crux of just mentorship, is like knowing that you made a mistake and not owning up to it, and then putting the onus on the mentee. That's just whack. So I would just say like just own up to it, plain and simple.
I'll underscore all that. Let's get to Q&A.
Thank you so much for that, everyone. Especially what you just said, Steve, makes me think about all of the dissolutions of mentoring relationships I've seen happen with colleagues and with peers, because that transparency wasn't there, because no one was willing to say my bad, and then they just didn't speak for years, right? And so it's so important. Thank you for that. Our first question comes from Anonymous, and it is, how would you all suggest a new doc student should go about seeking out a mentor if their research is fairly new and there are not a lot of people studying it currently?
Well, I would ask specifically what it is the person feels like they need mentoring in. So is it mentoring in how to build reciprocal, on the ground community relationships in hip hop settings? Is it mentoring to publish a peer-reviewed article? Is it mentoring to develop your research question, right? Is it mentoring to, understand how to, like, irrespective of discipline, how to, like, develop healthy writing patterns and have a healthy emotional relationship with your writing self? I think the specificity of what the mentoring is really a crucial starting point.
Is it all right if I know I've been sandwiched, if I add something to that? What I've heard in a lot of people's comments and my own experiences is the ways, the mentor, like, yes, it would be great if that mentor was like at your institution or in your town, right? that doesn't always happen, or often doesn't happen, right? And so you have to be comfortable with especially with technology and otherwise, just finding or going to the spaces, right, where your community, where there's going to be a community that supports you, that's a virtual or physical space. The irony of going to AERA, which is like a really bizarre space, but yes, and then finding the pocket in AERA, right, where you're nurtured, right? I remember I went to the Free Minds, Free People conference back in like 2009. I think Dr. Teresa Perry like nudged me in that direction, so I was like, okay, I'll go, right? And I was at this conference, and it was like a conference where I genuinely wanted to, like, I don't know, network with people. And I met, and there was this presentation by this amazing high school teacher named Dave Stovall, and I was like, man, this brother's the truth, man. I was like, wow, I would love to have him as my high school teacher, right? As I'm like basically leaving the conference, someone's like, yeah, he's a professor at I was like, I was like, what? Wait, I was like, excuse me? I was still a grad student. I was like, he's a professor? I was like, he's like, what? He teaches like at a university? And for me, like, it blew my mind as like, I was like, because even at grad school, I had no intention of being a faculty. I was like, faculty, that's whack. Like, I can't be that. And then I see this example of this person. I was like, wow, I could do that. And then eventually, it's crazily I'm sure at AERA, I like shyly approached Dave and was like, hey, what happened, right? And he nudged me in the right direction. But I think it's about finding, sometimes you got to go to the spaces that aren't right there to find the help you need. Oh, I'm supposed to do the next question. I'm sorry, I got to mute myself. The next question is from Bianca. It's, in your opinion, what should the next wave of hip hop based education encompass? What should it look and feel like in the K-12 as well as in a research context? I would also add higher ed as another context that this could happen as well.
I'm gonna go ahead and throw it out there. I think for me, I think we've done a lot of theorizing hip hop education, hip hop based education, and I think, at least from my own experience, I'm moving to a situation where, like, what does the process look like of how we theorize it, and what does the end product look like? And so for me in my research, when I finished my dissertation, I came and moved to Tulsa, and I was just at the right place at the right time, and a job was offered to me as the manager of education for the Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan Center. And I raised my hand and I was like, what does a 30-year-old hip hop scholar who's working in student affairs and education, how does this transition look for you all moving to the museum exhibit world? Especially with Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan, I'm like, hey, like, I know of them, I know of their themes, but like, I can't go to a North Tulsa, Booker T. Washington High School and be like, yo, I'm Dr. View, and I'm here to talk about Woody Guthrie today. And they're gonna look at me like, who are you and who the hell are you talking about? So I think for me, it's looking at the themes and the theorization, and how do we allow the students, allow the mentees to create. And so my perception of mentoring is moving outside of the classroom and moving into the community. So I have an honor responsibility to executive produce a compilation hip hop album in commemoration of the 1921 massacre. And you have all these artists and poets and teachers and educators who have come together that I've galvanized to say, hey, this is the approach. This is the epistemology of listening. I'm not going to censor you all. You're going to be your authentic self. And whatever comes out of it, comes out of it. And that's truly how I've been moving within my work. And so for me, it's like, hey, like, I've appreciated, learning from Emery and Stovall and Emden and the likes. But I'm like, yo, like, it's time to show the world, what we're about. And to give you all the last thing before I stop talking, I'm currently in negotiations with Motown for an actual distribution deal for Fire in Little Africa. So now you're talking about, not just, this big mainstream like opportunity, but like for us to be grounded in the work. Like the work is the foundation of us even getting to this point and having, you know, be able to pick up the phone and talk to Torie and Emery and Tina, like, yo, what is happening right now? So I think just moving from the theorization to actually allowing the students or the artists or, you know, the educators to create, and it doesn't have to be an album, it could be just anything, but the ability to create and show the true essence of the work, I think is the next steps, at least in my eyes.
Yeah, I could talk about this question forever. Like, I think there's so many new directions. Like, I think, you know, the further, I don't think we've theorized like hip hop educational practice enough. I think the theorization of it through existing disciplinary lenses, like right through hip hop's own lenses that are organic, indigenous to the culture, right? Whether that's through the aesthetics of the elements. I saw an article a couple weeks ago by Adam, I think it was Adam Cruz, music educator. He used hip hop aesthetics as an analytical tool in his methodology. So he was looking for kind of the breaks and ruptures and affective exchanges between participants. Like you following this? Like the aesthetics of hip hop as an analytical tool to understand interview data. I think we have to not. I think we have to not be afraid to locate hip hop specifically within existing disciplines, but then also understand hip hop as a forming discipline in and of itself. Like, and not be afraid of going across, of working within those silos, right? But then also thinking across those lanes. Like, I think, so like Stevie's getting into like the sonification of hip hop, like getting into like sound studies in hip hop. I'm drawing from ethnomusicology, combining that with hip hop toward products. Like you got Stevie's stuff coming out, like Rawls and Robinson's like hip hop education article, the hip hop ed record label. I mean, this is like thinking outside of just the confines of academe, but also not losing what happens to these other spaces when we take scholarly tools with us to there. I could talk forever about that.
You two said it. I mean, ultimately, and for me as a practitioner, that's a lot of what it comes down to. Again, echoing Stevie, and also, you know, what Emery just said about taking hip hop into other spaces, our hip hop theories into other spaces. And again, just thinking about the practice, right? Because it's one thing to write about these things. It's another thing to really create tools that folks can use on the ground, right? And I'm thinking in particular in my context as a youth worker, what does it look like in nonprofits, right? And moving beyond this, like the simplicity of like, we're just gonna have a hip hop based program where we freestyle. Like, yeah, there's something there for sure. But moving beyond that, right? And really using the hip hop theory that we've created in higher ed to not to just vitalize, but reconceptualize and reimagine what youth work looks like, especially outside of schools, right? Especially since we know like so many of our young people have hip hop sensibilities, but we're not really harnessing that in the actual work that we do, right? So just, yes, again, like using that theory to actually do something in real time with real folks.
Thank you all so much for that. And I don't think we'll stop for a long time having these conversations around sort of what's next, because this work is constantly evolving. And something I thought about as y'all were speaking is how we're seeing in real time, in some ways, like the dissolution of school as we know it, right? In terms of the physical classroom space. And so for those of you who are in this session, who are emerging researchers in hip-hop-based education, I hope that you're also considering, what does this work mean when you don't physically have a desk? You can't physically hand out worksheets, when it's not sort of this very tangible, and we listen to the song, we watch the video, and then we count it, right? With those sort of very tangible examples that we often see of hip hop education. What does it mean to approach this work with hip hop as theory and ways of knowing? I know scholars like Emery, Joyce and Wilson, Bettina have really been at the forefront of thinking about hip hop as a form of knowledge and thought, more so than just sort of like the worksheet, right? And so I'm really excited to see where this goes and what people are going to do with this in the coming months and years and decades and centuries, etc. So thank you all so much. I know we're out of time. If there are any sort of additional questions, ideas that folks want to drop into the chat, please, everyone, drop your projects into the chat. Steve, I was trying to find your website and I couldn't to drop it into the chat, so please put it there for us if you don't mind. And of course, anyone else who's on the call who's not a panelist, if you have exciting projects, contact information, anything that you would like to share, this is what we do, right? This is the space for it. So please drop it into the chat, and then save the chat before you leave so that you have, there should be a button to do that, so you have all the information there, or copy and paste it. So thank you again, panelists. And I'm going to turn our closing words over to my co-moderator. And of course, any additional thoughts or questions or comments from the panelists.
I was sitting here like trying to furiously put in my contact information, but no, thank y'all for really showing up. What I was thinking, it was like, it's rough, man. It's rough days, right? These are tough times in so many ways, and I'm really, as much as it's hard to just live these days, really, like, I'm really cherishing these times like these, right, where we can, even though it's a virtual get together, but really, like I was saying before, find those spaces where you're feeling affirmed, where you are affirmed, we can build together. So all I can say is just thankful to have this time and space to build with y'all. So thank y'all very much.